The stones of the ancient world still speak, revealing the people, places, and events that illuminate the world of the Bible. Join archaeologist Dr. George Sparks and Dr. David E. Graves as they explore biblical discoveries that bring Scripture's historical setting to life. Sponsored by Electronic Christian Media. Now let's dig into today's podcast and discover the past.
Good day, everybody. This is a new archaeological podcast, Stones That Speak, with Dr. David Graves, and I am Dr. George Sparks. We have a very special guest, Dr. Jens Notroff. Did I say that correctly, sir?
That's perfect.
Okay. He studied prehistoric archaeology in Berlin, working in the Göbekli Tepe project since 2006. His research interests include both the Neolithic period and the Bronze Age, with particular concern for the re-representation of hegemony and social hierarchy in the prehistoric societies. Also, the placing of cult and ritual activities together with the inquiry of archaeology evidence, such as burial customs, mortuary rituals, with particular curiosity for different types of burials. Doctor, thank you for being on our program.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, actually. Thanks a lot.
We're going to be talking about your work at the Göbekli Tepe site today. Let me say this before I go into that. For information, ongoing and past research, you can look up his profile on academia.edu and ResearchGate, and we'll also put that in our notes at the end. We did send the doctor a list of questions, so we do not ask people to be on our program and try to be tricky by any means. So yes, he's been informed, but we don't know what his answers are going to be. So we know our questions, but not the answers. So it could be a surprise, you know. And Dr. Graves, you want to start?
Well, we were just curious as to how you got involved with
Yeah.
and how did you show up there? And I worked in Jordan for a number of years at Tel El Hammam, 15 years in Jordan, and that was kind of a by chance meeting I had with a colleague, and he said, "We're digging in a new site this season. Why don't you come along?" And that's how I got started. But we were on your experience.
Yeah, actually quite similar. In fact, I started in Jordan as well. So my first gig, so to say, in the wider region was in Jordan. I started back then. I was still a student. Actually, I started as a student assistant. And I just got a job at the German Archaeological Institute at the Klaus Schmidt, the then project leader at the Göbekli Tepe excavations, who also led a project in Jordan, in Aqaba actually, Chalcolithic. Yeah, in Aqaba, Chalcolithic. Early metallurgy center, Tel Hujayrat Al Ghuzlan, quite an interesting site in itself. And I started as a student assistant first in this Tel Hujayrat Al Ghuzlan project, where I helped in the excavations and in particular in processing finds and data here in Berlin in the Institute. But at the same time, since Klaus Schmidt was head of both projects, I did a lot of stuff in Göbekli Tepe already and soon switched into the role of a student assistant at the Göbekli Tepe excavations. And for some reason, I was lucky enough to just I just didn't left. I just didn't leave. I just stayed there at the German Archaeological Institute at the project. And once I finished my studies, once I finished university, I was promoted to research assistant and basically kept working in the project, kept helping organizing the excavations, excavating in the field, and processing finds and data. And this is how I got involved with the Göbekli Tepe project for quite some time. I think most of my archaeological career so far I spent at the site. We were lucky. It was a 12-year funded research project funded by the German Research Foundation. So we had a lot of time and a lot of opportunities to really go into this research and engage in with this site. But after these 12 years, now the project is run at a bit smaller scale, so a lot of processing has to be done. 30 years of excavation, you can imagine that a lot of finds need to be processed. But after this large-scale project somehow ended, I switched positions. I'm still at the German Archaeological Institute, but meanwhile, I'm not active actively involved in research there. Well, I still have some publication debts. It's a normal academic life, I think. But meanwhile, I'm the desk officer for science communication for the whole institute, for the whole research institute. And this is my day job, so to say. So presenting research results to a public audience. Yeah.
Oh, great, great. And this is probably one of the last questions that we post, but it fits in here. So I'll ask it at this point, and that's at the UNESCO site. Since it's become that, it's less archaeology and excavation, and now more research and conservation.
Yeah, I mean,
fair?
yeah, that's fair to say. I mean, we generally, in terms of archaeological research history, 30 years of excavation is next to nothing, right? If you look at the large excavations going on at Troy or Olympia, Olympia is also a German archaeological institution excavation. They just had an anniversary of 150 years of excavation history going on. So 30 years at Göbekli Tepe is basically not much, and that's why in the region and in this whole archaeological culture, if you would want to put it like that, we're still at the beginning on understanding this. But the site soon got a certain importance and a certain interest, public interest, and this is why it's it's our duty to also take care of conservation, of preservation of the monuments there. I mean, it was well preserved for 12,000 years in the ground. And once we excavated it, it's now open to wind, rain, weather, snow. So it's our duty to make sure it will be conserved for well, I'm not sure if we can guarantee another 12,000 years, but we try as best as we can. And this is why the conservation at one hand, but also we have to consider the region, southeastern Turkey. The touristic presentation is a very important factor here, because fair enough to say, it's an economic factor as well. Tourism in the region is a very important factor. And I mean, we're not doing archaeology to equip museums with nice things to look at. We're doing this to present people an idea about the lives of past people, but also to find answers to challenges we now have, and to look how did past people engage with the same challenges. And that means we, of course, have to make our results accessible for an audience, and that means tourism as well. So I was pretty happy when the site was considered a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Of course, it did change the course of excavation and research quite dramatically, because now we have a constant flux of visitors coming to the site. But the UNESCO site helps to somehow canalize this visitor stream and to designate certain areas and to present results. And I think that's a good thing to have people participate in this kind of work. So yeah, it changed our approach to the site and to the archaeology and our work there. But it, on the other hand, also helped to create an understanding for what we are doing there and why we are doing this.
Yeah, we worked in Jordan for 15 seasons, and we don't have that. The Jordanians don't have the funds to put into such sites, and we believe our site is Sodom, so it has biblical significance. However, it's just laying part of a farmer's field basically, and it just deteriorates over the time. I was part of the conservation team working in Shiloh in Israel, where they do have funds, and so quite a difference in the archaeology between countries. And Turkey, as you say, is really big on the tourism now, and it does help with some of the preservation of some of these sites. So that's really important. Well, George, did you have a follow-up question there somewhere? And
the scale of the site implies a massive workforce. What does the coordination of these hunter-gatherer groups tell us about early social hierarchies or the formation of prehistoric elitists? So in my mind, I'm thinking of, the pharaoh, and then working down to the working class, and how they organized this at such an early time in history.
That's incredible, right? To me personally, I mean, the monumentality of the site is something you can physically perceive, and this is something which, of course, brings to mind, and this is something you see there. So that makes it almost always the monumentality is what is the wow factor about Göbekli Tepe. This is what everybody is coming up with. But personally, to me, the organization behind it is much more interesting and compelling than the monuments itself. Because to create something like this, you certainly need a significant degree of cooperation, of planning, of coordination. And this is something really extraordinary and something these monuments really stand for, in my opinion. And that indeed leads to the question you were just asking. How do we have to imagine the social organization, the hierarchy of these people? I mean, we're talking about hunter-gatherer groups of people here, and at least historic analogies seem to indicate that we are not talking about large groups of thousands of people, but these are more in the hundreds, or even maybe about 50 people belonging to one group. And that makes the achievement we see here, we can physically touch here, much bigger in my eyes. And interestingly, this is at the core of our research as well. So how were these people organized? What kind of society do we deal here with? I think there are a couple of options we should or have to consider. For once, I'm convinced that it's not the work of one single group, but that several groups were coming together here, cooperating here, and in some kind of a communal effort, we're creating these monuments, these buildings together. And that does indeed means that we're some kind of labor sharing or organization has to be assumed behind it. But interestingly, we also see from historic or even ethnographic analogies that it does not necessarily call for hierarchy. This is a very modern thinking that we always think you need some kind of social structure, social hierarchy with people in charge and people not in charge to achieve something like this. But we know other examples that there are some kind of self-governing systems. So if the need arrives to build structures, a society can form or can reshape itself and adapt to the needs. Something which coming to mind more from your neighborhood than mine actually is, for example, the big hunting camps of the Native Americans in the Western US, where for a certain period, a certain season, couple of tribes of groups came together and created these huge hunting camps and developed a fluid hierarchy for the purpose or for the time of these big hunts, a hierarchy which then was flattened again when the tribes dissolved. And this is something I think we can imagine here as well, that we have a kind of a fluid hierarchy adapted to the needs which are in place right for the construction, and a hierarchy which is somehow dissolving again when these groups disperse again. On the other hand, we may have hints at what my colleagues termed charismatic individuals. So that there are maybe some people among these assumedly more or less egalitarian hunters which are standing out, because we have a couple of objects like buttons, like we jokingly call them scepters, which seem to indicate that maybe there are paraphernalia for specific specialists, being a ritual or political power. I'm not quite sure yet. Yeah.
That's interesting.
I can certainly relate in the sense that the fascination with ancient peoples' preoccupation with large stones. I mean, in Jordan, we had a large megalithic dolmen field.
Yeah.
I always marvel at how can they move such large stones of these. And then you think of Stonehenge, in the UK, and they even have some in Massachusetts as well. So this preoccupation with these large stones, and what was the fascination with them? Why did they build all these big things and
I'm
keep on doing it?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's impressive on one hand. Yeah, you achieve something really big. That is something which definitely has to considered here. But I also think I've got the impression with the dolmen you mentioned in Jordan, but also here at Göbekli Tepe, because maybe we can talk about this a bit later. These buildings were probably roofed or subterranean. I think at some point we're dealing with kind of artificial caves here. So people were recreating kind of a cave interior, reshaping some natural spaces, artificially creating spaces where they encountered the nature beforehand. So that is an idea I think is worth following. Yeah.
My mind just went to my visit to central Turkey, where you have a lot of these underground cities and buildings, and you might be right. They may have moved south, didn't have access to those, and so they wanted to replicate them. But I'm just thinking out of the box here at this point. But George,
yeah, I was watching a program. It kind of ventured into an aspect of Göbekli Tepe that I thought was very interesting. With a curator from the British Museum, Dr. Irving Finkel, who's a Syriologist, basically using cuneiform. And he brought to the attention some small seal, and he implied, could there have been a style of early writing?
I followed this as well, and I totally and really I'm an admirer of Irvin's work and outreach. He's brilliant, but in that point I was a bit well. I think he had a point here, but the way it was presented really somehow struck a nerve with me, because it was somehow I'm not going to say paternalistic, but he was presenting it as if nobody ever noticed it before, while in fact the stone plaquette in question was already published with this question in mind as well. And there is a rich literature actually discussing these Neolithic, we call them plaquettes or stone plaquettes, because many of them seem to have no other function than bearing these signs. So that is really the function. These are small stone tablets, plaquettes, decorated with basically what we could describe as kind of a shorthand for the larger iconography we encounter at the pillars at Göbekli Tepe, at other buildings, at vessels in the wider region. So the PPN, the pre-pottery Neolithic iconography, is a very complex and very rich inventory, and it is well researched. And interestingly, we have these small finds, we call them plaquettes, from a wider region of, it's not only Göbekli Tepe, it's a wider region of about 200 kilometers surrounding it, producing these finds. And interestingly, the large images like aurochs, for example, are depicted here in kind of it looks like a shorthand. So you have the bucranium instead of the aurochs. Birds are also very stylized. You have snakes stylized as zigzag lines. And indeed, it has been discussed if this might have been related to stamp seals, so that they were used as stamp seals. I'm not really convinced of this, because we do not have the counterparts, the actual stamps or the actual stamped surfaces. And I think it would have made more sense to have the relief inverted then. So if you want to stamp something, it would make much more sense not to carve it into the stone, but the other way around. But I totally agree on the suggestion that they were a tool or a means of communication. I'm not saying it has been writing, because we are not in a position now to really clearly prove that these symbols had a counterpart in language, actually. So that to count as writing, you need to check off certain boxes, and we're not there yet. And I don't think it's writing in our understanding, but it is a means of communication. Of course, this is a kind of a narration depicted on a stone, and the stone was produced to bear this communication. It is a medium. So yeah, if you're not going to call it writing, but a communication storage or something like that, then I'm totally on board with that. Yeah.
what about some of the comparisons, perhaps with Luwian, and the iconographic comparisons with some of these other related or close languages that some have tried to make the connection with?
I know that there are ideas. It all stands and falls with the logographic meaning, right? And we have to keep in mind that we are here in the 10th millennium BC. So everything we have about writing, so that we can really prove kind of writing, and even if we find visual similarities, is much later, and we have this huge gap we need to bridge. And it's fun to speculate about it, and I'm totally on board to think about this. But can we prove this? No, we cannot. So I'm hesitating to really draw a continuous line in the development of writing all the way back to these stone plaquettes at Göbekli Tepe and the surrounding fine spots. Is it fun to speculate? Yeah, but we cannot prove it. So I think we're not in a position to declare it writing per se.
Okay. Yeah, my specialty was the second millennium of the Hittite suzerainty treaty, so it's a bit off the date. But I was always curious.
Hey,
We
let's
take-
get back on track with the next one.
We take it
so
where it'll lead us, George.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wherever it goes.
Yeah.
Let's see. How did they feed the workers? They were talking about this mass organization. How do you feed this? You got to grow it. Somebody has to prepare it. It has to be served at a certain time for the workforce. How did they feed the workers? Is there definitive evidence? I don't, not definitive, but is there evidence for large scale feeding with the proto-agricultural on-site workforce?
That's the big question, right? If we assume that there are several groups coming together, communal in a communal effort, building these buildings, then really the question is, what did they eat actually? And I mean, we certainly think that there were certain special events. Now meanwhile we're calling the whole site more of a social hub, because this is more neutral term than a ritual site or whatever. But in the social hub puts it together quite well, because it implies that people are coming together there, gathering there. And if different groups come together, and you need more hands, I'm convinced you need more hands when one group could provide to build these things. And then you, of course, have to make sure to feed them. And it becomes even more interesting if you again look into ethnographic or into historic analogies. Then you can witness these megalithic constructions are almost always accompanied by feasts. So huge feasts are usually the kind of the motor for the construction of megalithic architecture. Until present times. So in the early 20th century in Indonesia, we have wonderful records of monumental megalithic tombs being built by, I think, hundreds or even thousands of people involved, more than you actually would need. It was a social event, so it was important for yourself to be there, not so much for the construction. They would have done with a lot less people, but it was important for you. And they were organizing huge feasts to feed the people. And maybe it was also the other way around, to attract the people. So if you need a workforce, you need to offer something, and a feast is always a good reason to come together. And well, then in the end you have to carry stones. Okay, then it's okay as well. And we do indeed have evidence for that at Göbekli Tepe as well, or we think we have evidence for that at Göbekli Tepe as well. Just to remind us, we're talking about hunter-gatherers here. So any animal bone, any plant species so far discovered at the site strictly is a wild species. We have no evidence for domestication yet, which is, I mean, it's difficult, because to really recognize a domesticated animal or domesticated plant, it takes time. So if I start to cultivate crop, or to have sheep or goats and keep them, they will not change overnight into a domesticated animal. To really, for us as researchers, to recognize this, it takes generations, that the bone material changes, that the genetics changes. So we can say it's clearly not the domesticated animal, domesticated plants we see at the site, but maybe they already were managed. So they had some animals already there for a certain time. They were collecting cereals, for example. But the basis of a subsistence was hunting and gathering. And we know this because we found a lot of animal bones, huge numbers of animal bones, and again, wild species. We have aurochs, the wild cattle, the ancestor of our modern cattle, huge beasts, a lot of meat actually. And we only have the bones from the meaty part inside. So there's no heads, for example, no aurochs heads are represented on the side. So it's only the meaty parts. We have gazelle, we have boar. So everything you need for a good wild meat barbecue is on site. And it's a huge amount of bone, so they're consuming a lot of meat apparently. And the age of the gazelles, the young gazelles, also indicates that whatever happened there took place in late spring, early summer, apparently.
I'm from Canada, and so my mind goes back to the Mennonites and how they had these barn raisings, and then the ladies all brought a lot of food and they have a big feast, and they do a barn raising, and so they come together for that. So that's sort of what my thinking was.
Yep.
Then of course I worked at Shiloh in Israel, and we have a large favisa there, which is a bone pile. And the analysis that we're getting now off of the bones is that they only come from the right side of the animal. Sacrificial favisa at Shiloh, which during that time period, so we can learn a lot from the bones that we harvest in our excavations, and those are important. And as you've shown, they're the wild animals that were roaming the fields there. So you got to have lots of protein to
definitely, yeah,
to build a structure like that. So, George, did
Yeah.
you have a follow-up?
You're saying ritual, and I'm thinking more like prehistoric party.
yeah, certainly, because I mean the story did not end with aurochs and gazelle. We also have quite some evidence for plant food processing, so a lot of grinding stones. And interestingly, we have huge stone vessels unearthed, which seem to have to be in stationary part of the buildings. And I'm not talking about pots or bowls or something, but really troughs with 160 liter of capacity. So they're quite large stone vessels, and we found well, inside we found some grayish residue we did analyze in the lab, and it turned out this is oxalate actually. Something which well, you also call it beer stone because it develops during fermentation, even in modern day breweries. During fermentation of cereals. It does also develop with other plants. So disclaimer, rhubarb and spinach, for example, is a possibility as well. But cereals seem very logical because one of the sites there in exactly this region and this period, one of the Neolithic founder crops, einkorn, was cultivated for the first time, is just around the corner of Göbekli Tepe.
Wow.
So it seems to make sense that they were also experimenting with plant food. And I don't know, maybe something went wrong and the nice porridge turned bad or something because it was staying too long in the sun. And one of the hunters was foolish or brave enough to still try it out and notice, oh, that's not that bad anyway, so we can do it. So they may have produced an early version of beer, a very light beer, but something which is totally in the realm of possible. Yeah.
Oh, the first Bud Light.
Yes, and it fits the whole feasting narrative, right?
Yeah, that's just two things that sort of come to mind for me. One was the use of beer. We were just talking before you came on about I have a cuneiform tablet with a receipt on it that mentions beer. So, very early they learned how to ferment this stuff. So the other thing is that perhaps our listening audience don't realize that the period we're talking about here is pre-pottery. So that you don't find pottery, but you do find some of these stone vessels. So maybe you can expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe we should have started with that. Yeah, pre-pottery Neolithic is indeed the period we're talking about here, and it is named after the absence of the typical the one thing you usually find on excavations is pottery, lots of pottery, huge amounts of pottery, and the absence is really remarkable in these Neolithic sites. So there is no pottery, which is interesting, but somehow maybe also logical. It does not mean that these people were not able to make pottery. So we are not talking about some kind of technical deficiency or something like that. They had, for example, clay figurines, sometimes even burnt clay figurines. So they certainly knew the material. We have very fascinating terrazzo floors from chalk gypsum, which also involves pyrotechnical approaches. So you need to know pyrotechnics to create these terrazzo floors. So they definitely had the knowledge of the necessary technology in the background. They just didn't create pottery, and maybe because they just didn't need to create pottery. We certainly have to assume they used other vessels. We know they had stone vessels, large ones, smaller ones, but it suffers. We just need to look into history and know there are vessels made from bark, from leather. So there are a lot of containers of other materials for containers. So you do not necessarily need pottery, and pottery is something which is very, very impractical if you are a society on the move. It really it's not practical. So maybe they just had no reason to develop pottery at this point, and
Yeah.
that's what's so characteristic for this PPN pre-pottery Neolithic. Yeah.
It's significant in later periods. You have in Israel where we're excavating, we do find a lot of stone vessels, but we find them there not because they can't do pottery. We find them there because those are the clean vessels. And so there's a religious significance for them being in that period.
Mm-hmm.
But as you go earlier into the Neolithic, it's you have to think differently because it's a different period. And you are correct, I think, in that it doesn't mean they can't do it. It just means they have another reason for doing it. George, did you have a follow-up?
Well, yes, since we're talking about like the pottery, the strata, which you're saying the terracotta that we think about in archaeological digs doesn't exist at this ancient time, but we haven't dated it yet. What does it date back to?
The site of Göbekli Tepe, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, we have a pretty clear image of the chronology. For once, I mean that there are certain ways to date a site. So you've got the archaeological method, basically via material culture. And we do not only find a lot of animal bones, but we also have the hunting weapons they were using. So a lot of arrowheads from Flintstone are literally littering the whole site. So when I started excavating there, the surface of the whole mound was glittering in the sun because there was so much of Flintstone lying around. And the tools we find are very, very typical for the pre-pottery Neolithic. So we can clearly assign in comparison to other sites, the tools already to that period. The stone vessels, again, also fit the period. So we're talking about the 10th millennium BC here, starting in the 10th millennium BC and moving into the 9th millennium BC with these tools. And the stone vessels and the iconography. Because this is not an isolated singular site, but it belongs to a cultural context. And there also is, of course, next to the archaeological dating, we have scientific dating methods. And of course, we use them as well. And radiocarbon dates, for example, definitely support the same dates. So we've got charcoal from the wall plaster of the inside the rough walls. We see the image behind you, George. The walls, they were plastered on the inside, so they were not appearing as rough stone walls, dry walls as we can see them today, but they had a mud plaster. And in this mud plaster and in the mud between the stones, we found charcoal, and we could date this charcoal. And that is definitely the very same age. It's about 9,700 BC, Cal BC, if you calibrate it. So it all fits together and really supports the chronological setup of the site in the 10th millennium BC.
Okay, so 12,000 years old.
Yep,
Wow.
basically 12,000 years old, yeah.
when we were excavating one of the Qumran caves, K53,
Mhm.
I was the register of finds, and we had a number of flint arrowheads. So we know that the cave had been used, back as early as the Neolithic period, and there was habitation there, and which was pretty significant. So again, they went from cave to perhaps building a structure similar to what you were describing, and had excavated here as maybe replicating a cave for them. So
That's a nice idea too. I really would like to explore further. Yeah.
yeah, George, any further question on that? It was good to see the the evidence for the dating. That's important.
Right. No,
Because we
that's
usually date our sites with the help of pottery as well. So in your case, without it,
Yeah, but the good thing about material culture is that everything humans are doing is somehow undergoing fashion change. So we can, that's a good thing. We can really recognize how things change. And I know that for non-archaeologists, this is sometimes a really abstract concept to really grasp them. How can we recognize that things look different in different times? But we know this from our everyday lives as well, right? It would be easy to distinguish a car from the 1920s from a, I don't know, modern electric car. So we really know what specific forms, specific shapes belong to specific
with
times.
my
Yeah.
students, I used to use the evolution of the Coke can to a Coke.
Yeah, perfect example as well. Right, yeah.
Good, George.
Well, I'm glad you could say I'm not that old, David. You kind of lost me on that one,
Lived a
this
long time.
I know this wasn't on our list of questions, but since we're looking at the dates, how far does Tepe distance itself from the building of the pyramids?
Let me do the maths, but it's like, I mean, we're talking about 12,000, 12,000 years ago for Göbekli Tepe. And the
Yeah,
pyramids, I'm not sure about the latest date, or something
they're around
3,000.
2600 BC,
Yeah,
2600.
something.
Yeah.
So, just to put it in perspective, the pyramids are closer to us than to Göbekli Tepe. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so we're talking about now thousands of years.
Yeah,
Thousands.
definitely. Yeah.
Okay, another one would be Stonehenge.
Stonehenge is right in the middle, roughly. So the Göbekli Tepe is about twice as old as Stonehenge, but Stonehenge as well has a long biography history, a lot of changes. So you could argue when you set the beginning, but definitely not as far back as Göbekli Tepe. Yeah.
Right. So the uniqueness of the site, because when we think of these massive bone building structures that are popular in our culture, like, oh, the pyramids, right?
Yeah. I
Or
mean,
Stonehenge.
yeah, but I
Then
mean,
this goes even further. This is way,
it
way
it
back.
it goes further, but I would not overestimate the age. I mean, monumentality is impressive in itself, but there are arguably other forms of monumentality as old or maybe even older. The huge mammoth bone buildings from modern day Ukraine come to mind, which are basically also the same age. And personally, I would also count the Paleolithic caves with the cave paintings as kind of early monumentality. They're not built in itself, but the achievement they represent are, in my opinion, as monumental as the architecture we're talking here. So it is something special for sure, but I wouldn't single it out to be honest. And something we also did not mention yet. Göbekli Tepe is not an exceptional site, right? For a long time it was this one single site on the mountain, like a lighthouse, shining its light into the valley. But now, with knowledge of a number of other sites in the region, we know that in fact this is part of a larger network of an archaeological culture and not one single exceptional site producing this kind of architecture. This is a cultural phenomenon. We now, with recent research to just the last 5 or 10 years, we can now say is a whole network of similar sites, a whole culture we can see here. Yeah.
As a Canadian in North America, now the earliest I can go back is the Vikings in Newfoundland. So this goes back a long way.
Well, okay, from that perspective, that's true. Yeah.
So you're mentioning those other sites besides
Yes.
the Tepe. Now, you also mentioned that you can recognize the time period you're at by the style of the tools that represent that period. Okay, how about the T columns? In some of these other locations, do they have other style columns besides the T column at Tepe?
That's a really fascinating topic. I mean, we already noticed even before these other T pillar sites were excavated, a lot of similarities. I mentioned the iconography, and we can follow the very same images, the very same style of images, and the affordances or the kind of a rule book for how to depict certain animals. And we can follow that over a much wider region of about 200 kilometers into northern Syria, into Iraq. And there are a number of sites producing uh, either the very same or very similar iconography in that time. So that clearly already hints at a kind of a communication room, an exchange room, a very large exchange room in this northern part of the Fertile Crescent. And that already makes clear we are not talking about isolated groups here. These are part of a network, of an exchange, of a communicating network. And indeed, at some of these sites, we find similar architectural representations. And they differ a bit. So the further you move east, for example, these T pillars become more kind of steels without the T head, but upright stones. If we move to the Levant, to Jordan, for example, Wadi Feinan being a very famous example, you do not have the stone pillars at all, but you find post holes in a very similar layout. So maybe they were using wooden pillars, wooden posts there. And then comes the development of the last 5 or 10 years in the closer vicinity of Göbekli Tepe, what is now named the Taş Tepeler region. Taş Tepeler basically translating to stone mounds, because there are more sites very similar to Göbekli Tepe. I mean, T-shaped pillars were for the first time recorded in the 1980s already during a rescue excavation at Neolithic, but they were smaller there and a bit younger than what we found at Göbekli Tepe. But now there are much more sites like Karahan Tepe, Sayburç, Sefer Tepe. So there's a whole map of sites with T-shaped pillars. And this makes clear that that Göbekli Tepe is not one enigmatic site, but that there's a network of T-shaped pillar sites. And they have similarities, but they also have differences. So there is kind of a regional network of pre-pottery Neolithic sites, some with pillars, some without pillars, but all somehow related or interrelated to each other.
Do they all have iconographic images on them similar?
The iconography is very similar. Not all of these pillars have images. Even at Göbekli Tepe, not all pillars are decorated with images. But the material culture in general sports a very comparable image. The stone vessels, arrow shaft straighteners, stone plaquettes, and sometimes the architecture as well. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. George?
Because of your interest in, let's say, cultic burials,
Yeah.
rituals, what is the significance that you see of this skull cult fragments? They're using fragments of carved human skulls. How does that have to do with their culture?
Yeah.
And also, much later, there was a lady excavating in Jordan, Kathleen Kenyon, that found skulls at Jericho.
Yes,
And I know they're
yes.
vastly different in time and location, but since you're interested in the
Yeah.
tombs and burials, what do you think?
Actually, we're not that much different in time and location. So I would argue that they somehow fit together. And Kathleen Kenyon, by the way, was it who termed the phrase of the pre-pottery Neolithic with excavations in Jericho and Tel Sultan, the ancient Jericho. This is where the whole pre-pottery Neolithic came from, actually, at least in research understanding. And yeah, that's a good point. And some point I have to speculate a bit, I'm afraid. But there's something very interesting going on with the iconography, and in particular when we approach it from the mortuary ritual side perspective. We do not have very much burials at sites like Göbekli Tepe. In fact, human bone material is rather rare, and it makes sense somehow if you keep in mind that burial in that period and that region is something special. So it's not nothing we can follow up with every individual. The known individuals definitely are not summing up to the whole populations we were confronting. So burial is something special, and often we find burials underneath the floors in the living houses. So this is where these specific burials are met. But again, in very low numbers. Interestingly, what we can witness with these burials is that they were not static but dynamic. They were opened when in the every once and again. And for example, the skulls were removed. And just as in Jericho, the famous Jericho skulls, these skulls were replastered. They were given back a new face with gypsum, and they were displayed. So it's a very close relation between the living and the dead. The dead somehow remain part of the society, at least these specific dead buried underneath the houses.
Yeah, I
And
did
yeah.
an excavation in Jordan at Tel
Yeah,
Hammam.
yeah,
The middle bronze was a middle bronze house layer that we were excavating in, and underneath the floor, I was able to. It was a child burial in a jar in a vessel with other pottery in it, so it was significant. But what we also did was they excavated one of the dolmens that had been undisturbed, and these dolmens, these megalithic stones. The theory was they placed the body on the top, the bodies decay, and then they put them in the. Well, the
exactly.
thing is, they didn't find any bones inside.
Yeah, exactly. That was the point
Just
I
pottery.
was going to make, because to remodel a skull, to remove a skull and to remodel a skull with a new face, it needs to be the flesh has to be gone. It needs to be excavated, and this is something we can follow a lot in the region in the pre-pottery Neolithic. A colleague, I think it was Ian Hodder. Yeah, it was an article by Hodder and Maskell, and they were dealing with the certain fascination with articulation and disarticulation of the human body. And this is true because this is something we also see in the iconography. There are a lot of depictions at Göbekli Tepe and now at the other sites as well, up to Çatalhöyük, which is a bit later, but fits iconographically and culturally at the other end of this whole phenomenon. There are a lot of depictions of either headless human bodies or separated human heads in combination with birds, mostly vultures. Sometimes the vultures are really recognizable due to their specific beaks and the color they have. At Göbekli Tepe, we have some great pictures of vultures and headless human bodies, or sculptures of a human head and a bird crouched on the human head. And this is it's a topos in the iconography you find very often, and this is interesting, because this may hint, and I cannot prove this other by the iconography I just mentioned. This may hint as this, well, on one hand, and this interest in articulation and disarticulation of the human body, but also on a specific mortuary ritual we know from historic times, and this is the sky burial. This is very similar to what you, David, just mentioned, that the corpses were they're deposited at some point, maybe far away from the settlements. Usually it's done, at least in historic examples, we know this from Asia in particular, on mountaintops or on buildings in very far regions. And then animals, mostly necrophagous animals, mostly vultures, are dealing with the bodies. They are excavating the body, so they're eating feeding on the flesh, and in the end, only the bones were collected. The bare bones are collected and treated further. And this is maybe something we may witness in the iconography. I cannot prove this because burials are so rare, and we only encounter occasional burials. But these remodeled skulls are another hint. Then from sites like Göbekli Tepe, we have bones painted with shapes and patterns, and this also indicates that the flesh must have been gone. And all this together really is a strong argument, in my opinion, to at least think about something like sky burials. And maybe sites like Göbekli Tepe were places where sky burials took place. And maybe this is the reason why we do not find many bones, but this strong iconography and other hints at necrophagous animals.
Yeah, one of the theories in Jordan was that well, we didn't find any bones in the dolmens. We did. There's a large cemetery south in the Jordan Valley down at Baba Dra. Estimate 1 million graves, and charnel houses and tombs, and that's where the bodies are, and that's where the bones are. And they believe that's where maybe some of the Bedouin were traveling through, and they were dropping off their remains at that particular cemetery, and that the dolmens were certainly ceremonial, because we found a lot of pottery, and I think we got 15 pieces of whole pottery from the middle and late Bronze period in the dolmen itself, but no bones. Where we find the bones down south at this particular large cemetery. So,
I mean,
yeah,
we
our theories continue.
yeah, we did, no, not we, but we as the archaeologists in general, found a couple of bones related to the other sites. So the newer excavations at these other T-pillar sites I mentioned, they're producing bones. And interestingly, just like in, for example, Neolithic or other sites, settlement sites from the same period, these bones were stashed and collected in wall niches. So we had wall niches with a couple of skulls and long bones. But again, these curated deposits of bones again hints at already excavated bodies. So it very well fits the picture. Yeah.
With all of the years that you've been excavating there, do you find what we would call a stratigraphy at our sites, different periods or layers, or Tel El Hammam was one of the longest occupied sites in the entire Levant. Goes from the Neolithic right through to the Iron Age and Roman and Byzantine and so forth. But so do you find that kind of a stratigraphy there as well at the site?
There is a stratigraphy, but it's really, really complex, not to say complicated, because there are so many backfilling events, which either are natural events from erosion or maybe even intentional deposition events. And it all goes together with the fact that these buildings at Göbekli Tepe were not created and forgotten, but they were constantly rebuilt. So there's a lot of hints at reparation, at rearrangement. Pillars were reused, that were moved to other places. So there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of building activity going on, and this really complicates the stratigraphy. And it's still under examination, so it's not conclusively finished yet. We have preliminary results already published as well about stratigraphy, and you can follow up certain steps for sure, but it's far from being solved. Yeah.
Yeah, we can go from stone structure to mud brick, and so we can kind of differentiate the different strata.
That's not really the case here. I mean, the material basically remains the same. It's the local limestone. What you notice is that building shape seems to change. We also know this from the pre-Proto-Neolithic in general, that there is a tendency from over roundish shapes to rectangular rooms. This can also be followed there as well. But it's a lot more complicated because there are so many rooms set into other rooms that it's kind of a backwards puzzle, and it's, as I said, still far from being solved.
So it indicates continual occupation and adaptation. You build on your house when another child is born, and so on and so forth. So grandma's house becomes your house, and so on.
Yeah, you're already changing, always changing something.
A challenge for us as archaeologists, for sure.
But that's half the fun, isn't it?
Oh, it is. Being a detective and chasing down the clues.
I got a question, because you're talking about like backfilling, but what's representing this backfilling? Or you said a reconstruction representing different times of like a reconstruction style, but the backfilling of the structure, the enclosure, the encapsulation, was it done intentionally, like a ritual, site ritual closure, or is it just debris over periods of time?
That was our working hypothesis in the beginning, actually, where the backfilling was part of the whole construction cycle of these buildings. And I mean, it would have made sense, because there are examples for this, right, in the history of such, in particular, communal structures. But it turned out to be much more complicated than this easy solution. So there seems to be a mixture, I would call it, of both, of intentional backfilling and of natural events. We have some traces, at least in the lower areas, which somehow appear like intentional depositions. And in particular, since the closer to the bottom we went, the less finds we found. So it was really, it seemed to be much more cleaner or more sterile even in the lower areas. But on the other hand, there are parts of the mound where you can really see already also in the stratigraphy that natural events led to collapse and to erosion and to filling events. So I think we are dealing with both here actually. Maybe there was some collapse, some evaporation going on, and we can even witness this today, right? If something collapses, you just make a plain level and start building again. And this is something we seem to be finding here as well, but also in combination with natural with intentional depositions. So it both, I would say, yeah.
Do you find any evidence of earthquake damage? We have some in our sites. But...
I'm not a building historian, but as far as I see, there seem to be traces of earthquakes, and the building historians in charge convincingly also argued for such the possibility of such damages at least.
Yeah, we have all kinds of specialists, working with us.
Yeah, you need a specialist to recognize the patterns.
We have an architectural archaeologist that works with Dr. Lane Rittmeyer, and he's wonderful in being able to identify those kinds of things. So we lean heavily on them for the reconstruction of things.
Yeah, I mean that's also something maybe people are really not well aware of, but archaeology is such a interdisciplinary subject now. You really have specialists for everything, and you need specialists for everything because things are so complex that you cannot do it all alone. And so archaeology, really, modern archaeology, really is teamwork, and this is something that I actually enjoy because you learn so much from the other experts, and it makes the work much more fun because there are so many people coming together making something big out of the dust. Yeah.
My supervisor at Aberdeen is the world's leading expert in his field, but he said, I got to call in a couple of other experts to do readers on this because I don't know the Hittite stuff and I don't know the Roman archaeology. So
that's how it is. Yeah, that's how it is. Exactly.
Yeah. George, did you have a follow-up with that, or did you want to take us
home? We'll keep on tugging away here. How do you interpret the images on the pillars? Like the T pillars has got features of, like predators along with plants. And so what is the motif? Is it some kind of a tribal totem? Is it a warning marker?
Yeah, this tribal totem idea is really compelling because in some buildings, some animals seem to be emphasized, while other animals seem to be emphasized in other buildings. But in general, there's a large variety of animals, and some of them are typically the depiction of hunted game. So you have aurochs, a lot of aurochs, gazelle, boar, but there is a quality to these images which indicates more than just an inventory of hunted game, because almost all animals are depicted in a very strong and very ferocious way. So the boars always present their teeth, the husks. Lions and leopards are shown with snarling, presenting teeth and claws. Foxes are usually depicted leaping. So, and you see all of this is somehow, well, it underlines the danger of these animals, of course. There's some threat going from them, but it also depicts the animals as hunters. This is something I find particularly interesting. So the leaping foxes, that's typical hunting behavior for foxes, for example. Also, the leopards are shown leaping. And this is interesting. Sometimes you even have the prey depicted next to the animals. So that's also quite interesting. That's quite interesting because it seems to be somehow kind of a self-reference to the hunters. So depicting the animals as hunters maybe is kind of an identification factor for the hunters creating them. This is one thing. And the other thing is, whenever the sex of the animals is recognizable. I mean, it's difficult with a snake or a scorpion, but foxes and boars and lions and leopards, it's pretty obvious. They are depicted as male individuals. So there's a very, very strong focus on masculinity here as well.
We have a similar sort of imagery in the Old Testament in the book of Amos with a roaring lion, and that God is depicted as sort of the roaring lion, and they would understand that if you hear the lion roar, it's too late.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. And something also quite interesting here. I mean, the images are depicted carved on the T-pillars. And the T-pillars themselves are clearly interpreted as anthropomorphic, as human figures. I say clearly now because now it's clear to me. In the beginning, I had difficulties to recognize this, but in the course of excavation, when we excavated the pillars, it became more and more obvious also to me as well. They have depictions of arms on the sides. They have hands. They have belts and loincloths hanging from these belts. So they really are stylized, abstract, anthropomorphic beings. I mean, they're still larger than life, 5.5 meters the largest. That's not a natural depiction of a human being, but an idealized depiction. And that's quite interesting because that means that the animals are projected onto the humans, and the human scale is something really interesting here. I mentioned the Paleolithic cave paintings, which also have a rich inventory of animal depictions, of very naturalistic animal depictions, but rarely you find human depictions among them. And if so, they are very small humans among these large animals. And here now we have animals depicted on larger than life human sculptures. And this, I think, has something to do with a changing mindset of these Neolithic people, that somehow they recognize they are still part of nature, but not as much as they used to be in the Paleolithic. Now in the Neolithic, they somehow recognize we can influence nature, we can change nature, we can elevate ourselves above our environment, and this may be the necessary mindset to start cultivation, domestication, to really change something in your way of living. You have to recognize your position in the world around you, and maybe this is represented here in the iconography as well.
So, what would you say, sort of as our wrapping it all up? What can we really learn from this site with regards to our ancestors with some certainty? And again, we always say when this day's theory is tomorrow's next theory. So how would you wrap it all up?
My favorite thing about these sites is when I give talks about this, or here in Berlin was an exhibition, the finds from the Taş Tepeler sites just a couple of weeks ago, and it ended last week or 2 weeks ago. And when I gave tours through the exhibition or after talks, people often come to me and ask, okay, but what happened to these people? Where have they gone? Why did they vanish? Where are these people now? And the great answer is that they did not vanish at all. They are not simply gone, but they moved on. And in the end, we are these people. These are the people moving northwards to Central Europe, bringing agriculture, bringing animal domestication into the rest of Europe and spreading it from there as well. So these people did not vanish. These people are us actually, and this is something I really like to keep here as a takeaway message. If we ever were asking ourselves, where did it all start? Where did our way of living start? Sedentary lifestyle, food production, basically where we, as we are today, where did we start? We can point our finger on this region and this time period because it did start there and then. And this is something I find as fascinating as humbling, because coming so close to the people who put it on track and to basically set the track for our lives today. This is something really, really fascinating, because it teaches us that for one, we are still the very same people with the very same challenges, but also we can learn from their solutions. They had very similar problems to us. the environment was changing. I mean, the ice age was just over, and suddenly the environment became something new. We had to adapt to a changing environment, to a changing climate. We had to adapt to changing societies. People, where conflicts, social conflicts were emerging, and so on. And we found solutions for this because we are still here, so we are not extinct. We found solutions for this, and this is something I think we can, as archaeologists, we can provide to modern day society. We are the ones who are able to tell people how societies behave and develop and react to challenges over a very long period, over hundreds and thousands of years, and what solutions were found. And this, in my opinion, is the true value of archaeology and the true gift we can give to today's society. We're not doing this to equip museums with old stones. That's just a side effect. We're doing this to learn what the people are actually doing and what can we learn from these people. So that would be my wrap up of this, so to say.
Great, great. Well, it's wonderful. It was great conversation, and in an area in a field that predates my experience in the, even going back to the early Bronze period. This goes back even further than that. It was interesting for me, and really appreciate it. George, did you want to take us out, or did you want to follow up?
Just one quick one.
Mhm.
And I'm going to raise some controversy here, David. This is going to be kind of like people are going to send in things like, I can't believe you. If you were going to say anything that would kind of like warn people of pseudo archaeology on the site, and I'm going to mention the name, Graham
Yeah, I
Hancock.
mean,
How do you say, like, don't want to slow down, people? This is not the pseudo archaeology. What would you say?
yeah, I mean, I'm totally aware that the site produces a lot of fancy ideas and theories, and I'm generally very open to listen to suggestions. But the problem with pseudo archaeology, in my opinion, is that it somehow goes the easy way. The thing in archaeology or in science in general is that we do not have easy answers to complex questions. That is in the nature of things. And pseudo archaeology goes the easy way in finding an answer or presenting an answer, an interpretation, and then just looking for the data which fits the answer and including this. While we have to do it the other way around in archaeology. We have to pull out all the evidence, all the data, in fact, we have, and try to find an interpretation which somehow fits all the evidence and not leave something out. So, in our case, the interpretation is at the end and not at the beginning. And this is the main difference. That said, I appreciate the interest, which is also it becomes visible even in these more fancy theories and hypotheses. But I really think it does our ancestors injustice because it often estimates their abilities, and that is a bit sad, and I think unfair towards the people who really create huge things, and in the end, it makes them smaller than they are, and if it does not recognize their achievements. So yeah, keep the interest going, but look left and right, and sometimes the riddle is even more interesting if you do not find the easy answer, but have to think about, okay, how do I now fit this piece as well and make the answer even more complicated? But that's life. Yeah, that's how it works.
In the reading and looking over different podcasts, I went over like a half a dozen podcasts before I did this. So I listened to some pseudo stuff, and to me it was fun just to hear it. I'm going to put you on the spot. Just yes or no. You think aliens were out there?
It is fun because hey, what's the harm? It's just a fancy idea and a silly idea, and it's entertaining. But there is a true danger behind this because the narratives are not just fun. What many people do not recognize is that hey, maybe aliens did this is just the modern version of the 19th century. Yeah, maybe white Atlanteans did it, and just look at the core of these narratives. You usually have sites from the global south, so it's basically it cooks down to brown people couldn't do it. You never hear that aliens built the Forum Romanum or the Parthenon or something like that. It's always it has a very bad taste, which really comes close to colonialism and racism, and that is something which is unnecessary and sad, in my opinion.
That's an interesting take on that. I appreciate it.
We
One
also
more.
use Occam's razor, which is sometimes the simplest answer is the best answer. So
Yeah.
we just say KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And as archaeologists, sometimes that does play into we sometimes complicate things more than they need to be. But the other thing I think is that our ancient people were not as simplistic. They were much
Exactly.
more developed and sophisticated than I think we give them credit for.
Yeah,
And
people
science
tend
did show us that.
people tend to forget that we did not change. We still are the very same Homo sapiens sapiens, which stepped into history 300,000 years ago. Our technology changed, but our intellect did not change. We're still the same creative and ambitious people like them. So saying that they couldn't do it basically says we cannot do it, and this is just that's just not true.
And very adaptive. We adapt very well. So this whole climate change thing we hear, we're adapting, and we'll get it right. But yeah.
Yeah.
George, did you have a follow-up?
Was just one more, and then okay, that was the alien, Doctor. That was the alien stuff that I heard. Okay, there's
Okay.
another one, and your answer was. I appreciate your answer. That was unique. The other one is, you think this was the descendants of Noah that built it?
I heard about this as well, and I mean, in the end, how can I disprove something like this? I cannot. But I can for sure say these are their real people, which were creating these enclosures, which were creating the images. Whoever came after them, I cannot say, but we came after these people. If they are the descendants of Noah, really boils down to how you like to map the story of Noah in history, which kind of archaeological evidence you find those. This is more in your expertise, I guess, because it's the kind of work you are doing to link archaeology and these biblical narratives. Personally, I can say I would have huge difficulties to draw such lines of continuous history, because it's simply hard to prove. I mean, even if it's true, I cannot prove or disprove it. So
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, on that,
Yes.
you want to take us home?
Yes, we need to do this. Doctor, thank you very much for being with us and answering all our questions, and then some. This is the Stones That Speak, and I'd like to thank everybody for being with us at this location in Turkey. You said Göbekli Tepe, of huge interest. I think we covered a lot of material here today. Be sure to make your comments, and let's hear what you have to say and add on. Doctor, once again, thanks for being with us, and everybody have a great day. God bless.
thank you.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Stones That Speak Biblical Archaeology podcast. All our archaeology books can be found at our ECM website and available on Amazon. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more informative episodes. Visit us at Stones That Speak, blogspot.com, and on YouTube for additional content. Thanks for watching.